It's been decades since the last manned moon landing, Apollo 17, which happened in December 1972. Isn't it time we thought about going back to our dusty satellite, and maybe even staying there? NASA has made a promise on this subject. They're preparing to send astronauts on the moon again, perhaps by 2025. This will all happen through a program called Artemis. It's also going to include the first woman ever to experience the lunar surface. Now you might ask, why haven't we done this already? One former NASA administrator said something interesting on the subject. It's not because of scientific or technological issues. Problem was that the potential projects took too long and were just too costly. You see, space travel, especially when it involves humans, isn't easy on the pockets. It's true that, in recent years, NASA had budgets of billions of dollars. Sure sounds like enough money, right? Well, not when you check out their to-do list. That's because they have to consider everything, from telescopes and giant rocket projects to missions also targeting the Sun, Jupiter, Mars, and beyond. When you look at it this way, NASA needs to be very good at budgeting to achieve all those goals. It's not just because of finances, though. The moon itself is quite problematic. It poses real dangers that cannot be taken lightly. For starters, its surface is filled with craters and boulders that aren't easy to land on. Then, there is the moon dust, or regolith, if you'd like to call it by its scientific name. It was created over many years by meteorite impacts. It's extremely harsh and sticks to everything. It can potentially damage spacesuits, vehicles, and systems quite quickly. Also, dealing with the lunar habitat isn't a walk in the park either. The moon has no protective atmosphere. What this means is that for 14 days at a time, the lunar surface is faced with harsh rays from the sun. That period is followed by another 2 weeks of total darkness. All these changes create extreme temperatures, which us humans are not really accustomed to. There are solutions, don't worry. NASA is working on dust and sun-resistant spacesuits and vehicles. They're even developing a system that might supply electricity during those lunar nights. What's even more interesting about this system is it could come in handy on Mars too, once we get there. NASA also needs to draw in really smart people for its projects. Think about it. The average age of the people working for the mission control for Apollo 13 was just 26 years old. And these people had already been part of numerous missions by that time, which means they'd had considerable experience from a very young age. But here's where other individuals can help too. In recent years, it wasn't just NASA who's been working tirelessly to revolutionize space travel. There are many successful people out there with enough resources to join in on these efforts. Some are developing new types of rockets that can land on the moon too. In total, NASA landed 12 people on our satellite. It's definitely one of the most awesome moments in its history, if not the best. And those astronauts did amazing things up there. They brought back rocks, took snapshots, did science experiments, and even left flags behind. These were all important moments of the Apollo missions, but they weren't meant to create a safe place for humans on the moon. Scientists have had this idea of a lunar space station for a long time now. It's only logical. After all, it's just a 3-day trip from Earth. It means we can, technically, afford to make little mistakes here and there, without messing up the whole project. Plus, we'd learn so much before venturing even further into space. A moon base could provide fuel for deep space missions. We could also build telescopes up there, and launch them way easier in space. It could also help us in another important project. Figure out how to make Mars habitable too. Not to mention, a lunar space station would help us learn more about the moon's origin. Who knows, it could even bring in some money because of all that fun, exciting lunar tourism. Either way, the Apollo moon program took a lot of work. For starters, let's look at the sheer number of people involved. Around 400,000, from every corner of the states. Not everything was picture-perfect, tough. There were two main unfortunate events. Firstly, a fire mishap at the launch pad of Apollo 1. Secondly, an oxygen tank decided to throw a tantrum on Apollo 13, causing severe issues mid-mission. An important part of the project was Saturn V. It is to this day the most powerful rocket flown successfully, being 36 stories high. Still finding it hard to picture? This rocket stood twice as tall as Niagara Falls. Thanks to Saturn V, NASA successfully completed 13 missions. This included chauffeuring 24 astronauts towards the moon, with half of them even having a little walk on its surface. The existing rockets and space shuttles can't go beyond low Earth orbit. In simpler terms, they can't reach the moon with all the gadgets astronauts need to thrive. Current space vehicles are just not capable of carrying that load, at least not since the Apollo missions happened. Regardless, we did make a lot of progress on Earth and are ready to send astronauts to our satellite pretty soon. Here's where the Artemis project comes in. It's a program overseen by NASA. And to make sure it all goes well, NASA previously launched Orion, a spacecraft with no crew on board to orbit the moon and return to Earth. Think of it as an automated test drive. Before we actually send people out there again, we need to make sure all the devices work properly. One day, Orion will be the vehicle that will take astronauts to the moon again. It features a launch abort system to keep astronauts safe in case something bad happens during launch. It also has a service module, which is the powerhouse that fuels and propels Orion and keeps astronauts alive with water, oxygen, power, and temperature control. All these future projects make one wonder, what will life on the moon be like anyway? We can only use our imagination for now. Some say we'll be living in homes straight out of a fairy tale, something like a cozy hobbit hole. Living underground on the moon might be a must. That's due to the scorching temperatures and the lack of oxygen. If you add meteorite threats and the non-stop radiation, it's no wonder we can't just walk on its surface. What about transportation? Big and small companies alike are trying to create the ideal moon ride. If current estimations are current, one type of moon taxi will take off as soon as 2024. Unlike our current rockets, these space taxis won't have to deal with the harsh conditions of re-entering Earth's atmosphere. It will be easier for them to make multiple round trips. To support our lunar living, we'll need to have a special area for space taxis to safely take off and land. Think of it as a landing pad on a firm, flat stretch of moon surface, protected by walls to shield against moon dust. Moving around on the moon's surface will be made easier too. The next generation vehicles we're talking about will have their own controlled environment, which means you won't need a spacesuit while inside. Should feel like stepping out of your space ride for a bit. Then of course, you'll need to put on your spacesuit. All right. So we've got our homes and our rides sorted. But what about fuel? That's where the moon throws us a lifeline. The moon's lighter gravity means we don't need as much power to escape its pull. Plus, the moon has ice, and that's super handy. We might be able to convert this ice into rocket fuel. We'll need dedicated space gadgets to help gather this ice. One such tool is called Trident. It's like a drill, perfect for digging into the icy moon surface. Additional robotic helpers would then turn this ice into fuel and deliver it to a space gas station. If this works, rockets on their way to Mars could stop by for a quick fuel top-up before continuing their journey.
Now look at this fancy granite kitchen countertop. This one can also be available on the moon. I mean, there's no production whatsoever as of now, But there's enough raw materials for the kitchen of your dreams. And by the way, granite on the moon can even prove this dark horse had plenty of water at some point. So it all started when scientists found this weird blob of heat on the far side of the moon. It's all because of a massive chunk of granite that's buried underground. Apparently, granite is pretty rare outside of Earth, so this is a big deal. According to the researchers, there's this old volcano on the moon that hasn't erupted in like 3.5 billion years. But it turns out it's still giving off some serious radiation. The scientists used a fancy new method with microwaves to measure the temperature below the moon's surface. They found this area that's about 31 miles across, where it's like 18 degrees warmer than the rest of the place. And it's right under a spot that collapsed and is full of silicon. It's not as thriving as Silicon Valley back on Earth, it's just a volcanic crater, but without all the lava spewing out. The scientists even compared it to those granite rocks you see in Yosemite, like El Capitan and Half Dome. You know, those giant rocks that look super majestic? Well, apparently, they're made of the same stuff. Researchers claim that granite is super common on Earth, but not anywhere else in our solar system. So, this could change everything we know about other rocky planets. Right, now we know there's granite on the moon, but why is that important to us? So, you know how granite forms on Earth? It's all thanks to water and plate tectonics teaming up to create these huge blobs of melted rock beneath the surface. But guess what? The moon doesn't have any of that action going on, which makes granite super rare up there. But this discovery could give us some clues about what the moon was like back in the day when it had volcanic activity. Without water, making granite becomes a real challenge. But somehow, someway, they found granite on the moon. No water, no plate tectonics, but still, we got granite. So what does that mean? Did the moon have water in this one spot? Or was it just ridiculously hot? I guess we'll need to give a tad more time for the scientists to figure it out. The water on the moon is an issue, though. Duh. As of now, the moon is bigger than the Sahara Desert, but somehow 100 times drier. Astronomers have been debating for ages whether there's any water on this celestial neighbor of ours. But in 2020, NASA's SOFIA mission finally confirmed that there is indeed water on the sunlit part of the lunar surface. Turns out those grains of lunar dust have little molecules of H2O hanging out on them. Back in 1645, when people first started gazing at the moon, they were fascinated by these dark spots all over its surface. Dutch astronomer Michael van Lengren even made a map and called these spots Maria, which means seas in Latin. Sorry, Michael, they're just actually plains of basalt from ancient volcanic eruptions, but we still use the term Maria today. In 1892, an American astronomer named William Pickering discovered that the moon has practically no atmosphere. No clouds, no atmosphere, no chance for water to stick around. So, scientists started thinking that the moon was as dry as a desert. But then, in the 1960s, a theoretical physicist named Kenneth Watson came along with an idea. He suggested that water ice could actually exist in the shadowy craters of the moon that never see sunlight. These areas are called permanently shadowed regions. It was a mind-blowing concept at the time. The Apollo missions from 1969 to 1972 finally gave us the chance to look for water on the moon up close and personal. But when the astronauts brought back soil samples, there was no sign of water. So everyone went back to thinking the moon was bone dry. However, in 1994, NASA's Clementine mission suggested that there might be ice in these shadowed craters after all. And in 1998, the Lunar Prospector mission found evidence of hydrogen concentrations in the permanently shadowed areas. This was a strong indication of water ice at the lunar poles. The images weren't super clear, but it was still an exciting discovery. And finally, in 2008, scientists decided to take another look at those Apollo samples. They revisited the old data and found some hints that there might be water after all. It was like finding buried treasure in your own backyard. As you can see, the moon is a pretty promising destination. It even has enough stuff to produce your food supplements – calcium, magnesium, you name it. Just kidding, it's not the best idea to munch on them to boost your diet. But there are a bunch of other applications they can be used for. Calcium is like the fourth most popular element hanging out in the lunar highlands. But here's the cool part. Pure calcium metal is actually super flexible and can conduct electricity like a boss when there's no oxygen around. Who knew, right? Anorthite is a rare gem here on Earth, but up on the moon, it's partly central for calcium. It can even help make those groovy silicon-based solar cells. To make them, you need some lunar silicon, iron, titanium oxide, and of course, our buddy calcium and aluminum. It's like a recipe for solar success up there in space. The moon even has precious metals like gold. In 2009, NASA was on a lunar mission and they found some gold in the lunar soil. They had a spacecraft right behind the rocket, equipped with a fancy spectrometer. Its job was to study all the debris that got released when the rocket crashed. And they found all sorts of chemicals, like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, ammonia, sodium, hydrogen, and even a little bit of mercury, gold, and silver. Hey, vampires beware. Now I know it's been quite a while since then, like 14 years to be exact, but measuring how much gold is actually there has been a real challenge. You see, it's hiding deep beneath the lunar regolith, making it tricky to get an accurate count. Yeah, metals are fun and lunar water may have existed, but what about food? Good news, everyone! Scientists are saying that plants can actually grow on the moon, but don't expect a luscious orchard. It'll be more like a moderate garden with just a couple of beds. Here's the scoop. A while back, those awesome Apollo astronauts collected samples of lunar surface material called regolith and brought them back to Earth. Fast forward 50 years, and NASA decided to use 3 of those samples to try growing plants for the very first time. They used dirt from under the lunar rover bumper to grow these plants. The team added water and seeds to the samples, giving each plant a gram of regolith. Then they placed them in a clean room and added nutrient solutions every day. And they succeeded. During that challenge, the brilliant minds dealt with small plants like mustard greens in the nutrient-poor lunar soil. Yeah, we'll have to export olive oil from Earth to dress it. So, plants can indeed grow in the moon's soil. However, they won't be as strong and healthy as the ones grown on good old Earth soil, or even the ones in the control group grown in a lunar simulant made of volcanic ash. But hey, it's just a start. We're still to find out if our dear moon is hiding more treasures.
NASA has some incredible plans for the moon. For example, their next ambitious lunar program, Artemis II. They've set their sights on landing astronauts, including the first woman and the next man, on the moon by 2024. Artemis is all about building a sustainable presence on the moon. They're planning to establish a lunar gateway, a sort of space station in lunar orbit, which will serve as a jumping-off point for lunar landings. And let's not forget about the cool lunar landers. Scientists are developing the mighty Space Launch System rocket, which will launch the Orion spacecraft carrying astronauts towards the moon. Then there's the Human Landing System, a snazzy lunar lander that will gently touch down on the moon's surface, allowing astronauts to explore and conduct amazing scientific experiments. And NASA isn't going alone this time. They're teaming up with international partners, like the European Space Agency, to make this lunar dream a reality. But all these wonderful dreams might be ruined by something that seems super small and insignificant at first. Picture this: no atmosphere, no air to breathe, and suddenly, a mysterious haze and radiant beams of light appear at sunrise and sunset. It's as if the moon is putting on a celestial show. But there is a twist to this beauty. During the Apollo 17 mission in 1972, this beautiful sight made one of the NASA astronauts, Harrison Schmitt, sneeze and made his eyes water. He called it lunar hay fever. This mysterious fever affected all 12 moonwalkers. From sneezing fits to stuffy noses, those astronauts experienced symptoms as if they caught a cold. It took days for the reactions to fade away. This event led to a discovery about lunar dust and its darker side. When scientists found out about these rays, they rolled up their sleeves and delved into their origins. And here's what they discovered. Those radiant bands of light were actually caused by sunlight sneaking through layers of teeny tiny lunar dust. The dust was composed of small particles and sharp glass shards, and was lurking everywhere. And it turned out that this lunar dust was a sneaky villain. It brought a whole host of problems. Astronauts who found themselves with impaired vision were just the beginning. The troublemaker went even further, damaging precious machinery and causing electronic malfunctions. It even had the audacity to corrode components and smelled like burnt gunpowder inside the spacecraft. Yikes. It clings to everything, coating surfaces like a mischievous blanket. It can clog up equipment, get into delicate machinery, and even mess with astronauts' spacesuits. In 1972, things got really hairy again. The Apollo 17 astronauts faced a nightmare. After just 22 hours of gallivanting on the lunar surface, their spacesuits suffered irreparable damage. Yes, you heard that right. Irreparable. The dust diminished astronauts' mobility, making it harder for them to move around and perform their moonwalks with grace. And no matter how hard they tried to clean it off, it clung on for dear life, leaving the spacesuits in a sorry state. So, as you can see, it poses some serious challenges for future moon missions. But our intrepid scientists aren't giving up. To solve this problem, they have to understand how lunar dust forms and why it's so darn clingy. They found out that it all begins with meteorite impacts. When these space rocks crash into the moon, they generate a fine dust that fills the air. Sometimes these impacts even cause minerals to melt, forming sharp glass shards that mix with the dust. Talk about a moon makeover. The dust is also filled with silicate, a material commonly found on volcanic planets. Silicate inhalation can cause serious lung problems for Earth's miners, so you can imagine the trouble it can cause on the moon. A recent study found that even a scoop of replica moon dust was toxic enough to destroy up to 90% of lung and brain cells exposed to it. But it gets worse. The low gravity on the moon allows those tiny particles to float around for much longer, penetrating deeper into the lungs. Imagine breathing particles 50 times smaller than a human hair for months. That's a recipe for trouble. And you see, on the moon's surface, things are a bit different than here. There are no rainstorms or strong gusts of wind to blow this dust away. There is also no atmosphere to protect the surface. So without the natural forces of wind and water erosion like we have on Earth, these dry particles stick around persistently. And to make matters more electrifying, the moon is constantly showered by radiation from the sun. This exposure gives the dust an electric charge. The solar winds create positively and negatively charged particles. The particles then buzz around, repelling each other and giving rise to those radiant bands of light that the Apollo 8 astronauts witnessed. It's like a disco party on the moon. ESA, the European Space Agency, has gathered a team of experts to study the lunar dust. They're working with simulated moon dust mined from a volcanic region in Germany to understand its behavior and effects. Engineers also need to find a way to protect future astronauts and equipment. Engineers in NASA want to create spacesuits that can survive not 1, not 10, but a whopping 100 extravehicular activities on the lunar surface. That's like spending 800 hours out there, exploring and having a blast. Besides that, NASA initiated the Breakthrough, Innovative, and Game-Changing Idea Challenge in 2021. It was open to clever university students from all over the world. These young minds put their thinking caps on and unleashed a wave of innovative solutions. For example, they proposed using special fibers that conduct electricity, inspired by fluffy chinchilla hair. Just like how chinchillas stay dust-free, these fibers would help keep the lunar dust at bay. A furry friend lending a helping paw, isn't that adorable? Another bright idea involved an electrically charged brush activated by UV radiation. It's like a magical wand that zaps away the dust with a flick. Abracadabra, lunar dust be gone. And let's not forget the fabric inspired by clever insects. These insects have pollen-collecting structures that repel unwanted dust. So our ingenious students thought, why not mimic that? They designed a fabric with similar properties, creating a shield against the sneaky lunar particles. What's remarkable about these ideas is that they all use the power of charge to fight the dust. They cleverly repel it from the spacesuits, keeping them clean and protected. And even though all these ideas sound pretty great, scientists in NASA unleashed another, even better solution: carbon nanotubes. It's a great way to revolutionize spacesuit fabric. What makes these carbon nanotubes so special? Well, they possess some amazing superpowers. First off, They're superconductive, meaning they can carry electricity like nobody's business. It's like having a lightning bolt trapped inside a microscopic tube. Not only that, but these carbon nanotubes are tougher than the toughest meteors. They have the strength to withstand the harsh lunar environment, where even a speck of dust can cause trouble. Imagine having a suit made of a material that's stronger than Superman's cape. So, NASA's scientists decided to weave these extraordinary carbon nanotubes into the spacesuit fabric. The electrodes were carefully integrated into the outer layer of the fabric, making it a force to be reckoned with. But how do they banish the lunar dust? Well, here comes electrifying science again. When activated by a special alternating current, the electrodes create powerful electric fields. These fields work like magnets, repelling both charged and uncharged dust particles away from the spacesuit. Picture this like a dance party, where the dust particles are the uninvited guests, and the electric fields are the bouncers, swiftly escorting them out. Thanks to this technology, lunar dust doesn't stand a chance against our astronauts. Also on the bright side, the lunar soil can be used to make bricks for shelters. It can also help extract oxygen for astronauts to survive on the moon for long periods of time. When life gives you lemons, make a lemonade, right? So, let's cheer on our NASA Dream Team as they embark on this epic lunar quest. Let's hope that they succeed in their findings, and the next moon mission won't be a big problem. Stay tuned.